The synergy between MTV and Hollywood was very tight in the 90s. Many music videos felt like trailers for the movies they were part of. Similarly, some movies felt like a 2-hour commercial for the CD containing its soundtrack. In the 90s, a killer soundtrack wasn't just merchandise. Sometimes, it was the only reason we even went to see the movie. I can think of a few times we skipped the theater entirely and just bought the CD. As such, there were plenty of moments when the soundtrack ended up outshining what actually showed on the silver screen. We're running down those special soundtracks right here. Judgment Night, 1993. Let's be real, you probably haven't watched this Emilio Estevez thriller since that year. Actually, you probably never even watched it in the theaters, since it only grossed $12.5 million at the box office against a $21 million budget. But the soundtrack? It's a groundbreaking, genre-bending masterpiece that invented the blueprint for the rap-rock hybrid that will dominate the late 90s. Pairing hip-hop heavyweights like De La Soul, House of Pain, and Cypress Hill with alt-rock titans like Teenage Fan Club, Helmet, and Sonic Youth was a risky experiment that paid off spectacularly. When the album released, Pearl Jam was one of the biggest bands in the world, and their track with Cypress Hill called Real Thing became a major selling point, along with Faith No More and Booyah Tribe's Another Body Murdered, which got heavy rotation on MTV's Headbangers Ball. If nothing else, you should check out Helmet and House of Pain's Just Another Victim, which sounded exactly like what nu metal became just a few years later. Before we continue, we'd appreciate if you smash that like button and subscribe if you love 90s music nostalgia. Now, on to the next one. Singles, 1992. Cameron Crowe's film is a sweet and charming, albeit clumsy and unfocused, love letter to Seattle that successfully captures the atmosphere and vibe of the birthplace of grunge in the early 90s. While it received generally positive reviews, it grossed just $18 million on an estimated budget of $9 million to $16 million, so it didn't exactly make money hand over fist. You know what made money hand over fist, though? The soundtrack, which felt like a veritable encyclopedia of grunge right in the thick of the movement. It features Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Mudhoney, the Smashing Pumpkins, and Mother Love Bone, right before the scene exploded globally. If you want to understand the flannel-flying zeitgeist of 1992, you don't watch the movie, you listen to this album on repeat. Boomerang, 1992. This Eddie Murphy vehicle was a decent rom-com and a box office success. It's not the kind of movie you'll remember after a while, though. That's not the case with the soundtrack, which many people credit with defining the polished sound of New Jack Swing and early 90s R&B. It's also frequently cited as one of the greatest R&B albums ever assembled. The soundtrack spawned 6 singles, the biggest of which is Boyz II Men's End of the Road, which held the #1 spot on Billboard's Hot 100 for an unprecedented 13 straight weeks, not to mention becoming the unofficial prom song of the entire decade. It also launched the career of Toni Braxton, who appeared on 2 tracks in the album, with the label immediately fast-tracking her self-titled solo album shortly after. Other notable tracks include PM Dawn's I'd Die Without You, which reached #3 on the Billboard Hot 100, the Babyface Toni Braxton duet Give You My Heart, and A Tribe Called Quest's Hot Sex. Last Action Hero, 1993. It's a shock to me that this movie is considered a box office disappointment. I distinctly remember seeing this in the theater back in the day and loving it so much that I rewatched it as soon as it came out on VHS multiple times. However, Columbia Pictures supposedly lost money on it due to a massive marketing push that the worldwide box office of $137 million just wasn't enough to offset its eventual total spend. The soundtrack, however, remains one of the best hard rock compilations of the decade, with AC/DC writing Big Gun specifically for the film and Alice in Chains dropping Angry Chair. This disc stayed in alt-rock and hard rock fans' regular rotation long after the movie hit the bargain bin. The album also featured tracks from Megadeth, Anthrax, Def Leppard, Tesla, Queensryche, and Fishbone. Godzilla, 1998. We all remember the disappointment of the American Godzilla design. It was just a giant iguana and was rightfully panned by both fans and critics alike. However, Godzilla is still Godzilla, so the darn thing made a whopping $379 million against a $150 million budget, ranking as the third highest-grossing film of the year. But yeah, the ugly Godzilla redesign effectively killed off the planned trilogy and made it that Godzilla movie people avoided talking about long after its theatrical run. The soundtrack, however, was absolutely scorching. It gave us the heavy-hitting Come With Me by pre-Baby Oil Puff Daddy and Jimmy Page, plus absolute gems from Jamiroquai and the Wallflowers. The music had way more teeth than the monster did, especially since it also contained tracks from Rage Against the Machine, Ben Folds 5, Foo Fighters, Green Day, Silverchair, and more. Above the Rim, 1994. The film is a decent entry in the basketball drama genre and found decent success, earning approximately $16.2 million on a $6.5 million budget. What really made it memorable, however, is the soundtrack, which is widely considered one of the best compilations of Death Row's output at the time. It marked the moment G-Funk completely took over, gifting us Warren G and Nate Dogg's Regulate, which became an inescapable anthem in the summer of that year. The cultural footprint of that single song alone is larger than the entire film. Add to that Dr. Dre curating the tracks to ensure the album had a unified sound that successfully balances hard-hitting hip-hop from acts like The Dog Pound and The Lady of Rage with polished R&B from groups like SWV and H-Town. Yeah, this album is a special one. City of Angels, 1998. This remake of Wings of Desire was a moderate box office hit, but the movie itself felt like total melodramatic slog. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but it's just not my kind of movie. The soundtrack, on the other hand, became the 7th best-selling album of the year, mostly on the back of a pair of tracks that became two of the biggest radio hits of the late 90s. Those songs would be Alanis Morissette's Uninvited and Goo Goo Dolls' Iris, which not only helped sell this CD, it also helped promote both acts in anticipation of their own upcoming next albums. Aside from those two, other standout tracks include Sarah McLachlan's Angel, John Lee Hooker's Mama, You Got a Daughter, and Peter Gabriel's I Grieve. Spawn, 1997. I personally remember loving Spawn when I saw it back in the 90s, but I might be biased because I loved the comics. Turns out it had very poor critical reception, although it did make decent bank, raking in $87.9 million worldwide against a $45 million budget. What did save it for many is the Spawn the Album soundtrack, which paired some of the biggest rock and metal groups of the time with well-known electronic music producers. It's a formula similar to the Judgment Night soundtrack, albeit with songs that combine rock and techno, perfectly capturing the transition from rock to electronica as the predominant sounds of youth culture at the time. The best track on the album is hands down Can't You Trip Like I Do by Filter and the Crystal Method, which got regular MTV airplay, while tracks like Long Hard Road Out of Hell by Marilyn Manson and Sneaker Pimps, Satan by Kirk Hammett and Orbital, and One Man Army by Prodigy and Tom Morello show just how well distorted guitars and breakbeats can coexist. Reality Bites, 1994. The movie tried a little too hard to define Generation X, ending up appealing to a smaller audience than the producers had hoped, despite director Ben Stiller being careful never to mention the phrase Generation X during the movie's promotion. It reviewed pretty decently, but it definitely wasn't any kind of memorable film. The album, though, felt like the definitive Gen X mixtape. You got indie darlings like Dinosaur Jr., The Posies, and Juliana Hatfield. There's established mainstream acts like U2, Crowded House, and Lenny Kravitz. Then there's the retro revival of Baby I Love Your Way and My Sharona, both of which enjoyed newfound popularity because of the album. The biggest song to come out of it, though, is Lisa Loeb's Stay, I Missed You, which made her the first unsigned artist in history to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. That's right, Loeb didn't have a record contract when the song topped the charts. Instead, it merely got included in the soundtrack because her neighbor, Ethan Hawke, gave the recording to Ben Stiller, who deemed it good enough to include in the album. Batman Forever, 1995. Val Kilmer was okay, but the neon-soaked Schumacher direction was polarizing. Not to mention, the Batsuit with the nipples just looked plain weird. Well, it's Batman, so it made a ton of money in the box office, finishing the year as the second highest-grossing film in the US. The soundtrack to the movie felt like the album version of a variety show, as in, they threw in a bunch of stuff that didn't even feel in any way related to Batman. They didn't try to capture any kind of vibe either. Instead, they just threw in a collection of songs that were carefully curated to try to appeal to as big a demographic as possible. We guess it worked, since it went 2 times platinum, while spawning the #1 hit Kiss from a Rose by Seal. The album also featured tracks from U2, Brandy, The Offspring, Method Man, and Massive Attack, making it an absolute mishmash with no seeming rhyme or reason, just a bunch of stuff that whoever curated the darn thing liked, that, it turned out, other people also liked. Empire Records, 1995. The movie was, pretty much, a disaster. Critics shredded it and its box office tanked, barely making $300,000 at the till. Yep, that's all it made. It did eventually find its audience on VHS and cable, even being considered a cult classic by some. In my opinion, though, it was the soundtrack that kept the film's memory alive, not the other way around. The soundtrack actually sold better, getting a gold certification, so it moved at least 500,000 copies. That's no surprise given how the tracklist is basically an alt-rock music festival. Gin Blossom's Till I Hear It From You was used as the lead single, but it also contained tracks from the Cranberries, Edwyn Collins, even Dando of the Lemonheads, Toad the Wet Sprocket, Better Than Ezra, and Cracker, among others, practically ensuring it's going to appeal to the alt-rock crowd of the time. Lost Highway, 1997. David Lynch movies are always a fever dream that half the audience doesn't understand. This one is no different, receiving mixed reviews back when it came out and faring very poorly at the box office. It's an artsy movie. The similarly artsy soundtrack, though, fared very differently. Curated by Trent Reznor, the album was a dark, cohesive collection that helped define the late 90s goth/industrial sound and aesthetic. The lead single for the album was 9 Inch Nails' The Perfect Drug, which got heavy rotation on MTV, while Smashing Pumpkins' I debuted the new synth-heavy sound of the group, which was in stark contrast to their guitar-heavy previous album. This is also the album, by the way, that introduced the German group Rammstein to American audiences, effectively launching their international career and paving the way for their massive success in the coming year. Dangerous Minds, 1995. Michelle Pfeiffer in a leather jacket trying to reach inner-city kids felt like an unbearable cliché even in 1995. Unlike some films in this list, though, Dangerous Minds isn't a box office loser. In fact, it outperformed expectations, raking in $179.5 million worldwide during its theatrical run. The film itself, though, just really doesn't hold up. But Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise? That wasn't just a song, it was a global phenomenon that defined the aesthetic of the mid-90s. There's a big argument to be made that the soundtrack dragged the movie to box office success rather than the other way around. By the end of that year, in fact, the album was certified to have sold over 3 million copies in the US alone, while also topping albums charts in multiple countries.